Rome, Via Ventu, October 22, 1954. Grace Kelly was leaving the Hotel de la Ville after a press conference for To Catch a Thief, when three men in dark suits approached her car. She assumed they were overeager fans or persistent reporters. "Miss Kelly, we need to speak with you," the tallest man said in accented English. Grace smiled politely. "I'm sorry, but my schedule is completely booked today. Perhaps you could contact my publicist." That's when she saw the gun. "Get in the car, Miss Kelly," the man said quietly. Now, Grace Kelly, Hollywood's most elegant star, was about to vanish from the streets of Rome for 48 hours that would terrorize governments, mobilize FBI agents across Europe, and reveal a criminal conspiracy that reached from Sicily to the highest levels of the American film industry. But what happened during those 2 days wasn't a simple kidnapping for ransom. Grace Kelly had unknowingly become the center of a war between rival mafia families who needed her for something far more dangerous than money. And when Grace Kelly finally emerged from her captivity, she would never speak publicly about what she had experienced, because what she learned during those 48 hours was a secret that could have destroyed the careers of Hollywood's biggest stars and brought down the Italian government. The kidnappers had made one crucial mistake. They assumed Grace Kelly was just a beautiful actress who would panic and cooperate. They had no idea they were dealing with the most intelligent and resourceful woman in Hollywood. To understand why Grace Kelly became a target for Mafia kidnapping, you need to understand the war that was raging beneath the surface of 1950s entertainment industry. The Italian-American Mafia had discovered that Hollywood was the perfect vehicle for laundering money and gaining political influence. By the early 1950s, organized crime families controlled significant portions of the film industry through union manipulation, studio financing, and strategic partnerships with corrupt executives. Two rival families were fighting for dominance over this lucrative Hollywood operation, the Torino family from Sicily and the Benedetto family from Naples. The Torinos had traditionally controlled East Coast entertainment operations, including nightclub management and talent booking. They had strong connections to New York studios and East Coast film distribution. The Benedettos were newer to the American market but had deeper connections to Italian film financing and European distribution networks. They were trying to expand their influence into Hollywood proper. Grace Kelly had unknowingly become valuable to both families because of her unique position in the entertainment industry. Grace was one of the few American stars who was equally popular in Europe and America. Her films were distributed internationally, and she had contracts with both American and European production companies. More importantly, Grace had recently been approached by Italian producers about starring in a major European film that would be financed through a complex network of international investors. What Grace didn't know was that this international financing was actually an elaborate money laundering scheme designed to clean millions of dollars in illegal proceeds from drug trafficking, gambling, and extortion. Both mafia families wanted to control Grace Kelly's participation in this project because whoever controlled her would effectively control the entire money laundering operation. The Torinos had been negotiating with Grace's American agents to secure her participation. The Benedettos had been working through Italian contacts to make their own deal. When Grace arrived in Rome for the To Catch a Thief press tour, both families saw an opportunity to resolve their dispute permanently. The Benedettos decided to kidnap Grace and force her to sign exclusive contracts that would give them control over her European career. The kidnapping was planned and executed by Marco Benedetto, the 35-year-old nephew of family patriarch Salvatore Benedetto. Marco had studied Grace's schedule and identified the press conference at Hotel de la Ville as the perfect opportunity. Grace would be alone between appointments, without heavy security, on a public street where a quick abduction could occur without attracting immediate attention. The three men who approached Grace's car were Marco Benedetto, his cousin Giuseppe, and a hired enforcer named Carlo Vitali. When Grace saw the gun, her first instinct was to scream for help, but Marco immediately warned her that any noise would result in her immediate death. "Miss Kelly? We don't want to hurt you," Marco said in carefully practiced English, "but we need your cooperation. Get in the car and everything will be fine." Grace's mind raced through her options. She was on a busy Roman street in broad daylight, but the men were professional and calm. They had clearly planned this carefully. Grace made a decision that probably saved her life. She cooperated temporarily while looking for opportunities to escape later. "What do you want?" Grace asked as she got into the back seat of a black Fiat. "Just a business conversation, Miss Kelly," Marco replied. "Nothing more." The car drove through Rome's winding streets for about 20 minutes before stopping at a nondescript apartment building in the Trastevere neighborhood. Grace was taken to a second-floor apartment that had been prepared for her captivity. The windows were boarded up, the phone had been disconnected, and the doors were reinforced with additional locks. Despite the circumstances, Grace noticed that her kidnappers were treating her with unusual respect. She was not physically harmed, was offered food and water, and was allowed to use a private bathroom. "Miss Kelly," Marco said once they were inside the apartment, "I apologize for the dramatic methods, but we needed to speak with you privately." Grace remained calm and focused. "About what?" Marco explained that his family wanted to offer Grace an exclusive contract for European film production that would make her one of the highest-paid actresses in the world. "We're prepared to offer you $5 million for a 3-picture deal," Marco said. "More money than any actress has ever been paid." Grace immediately understood that something was wrong. $5 million was an astronomical sum in 1954, far more than any legitimate film deal could justify. "Where exactly would this money come from?" Grace asked. Marco's answer confirmed Grace's suspicions. The money was coming from various European investors who preferred to remain anonymous. Grace realized she was being offered a role in a money laundering scheme, not a legitimate film deal. "I'll need to consult with my agents and lawyers," Grace said diplomatically. "That won't be possible," Marco replied. "We need your answer now." That's when Grace understood she was actually being held prisoner until she agreed to participate in whatever criminal enterprise the Benedetto family was operating. Grace spent her first night in captivity, analyzing her situation and planning her response. She had several advantages. Her kidnappers clearly needed her alive and cooperative. They weren't experienced in dealing with intelligent hostages, and they had underestimated her resourcefulness. Grace also realized that her disappearance would trigger a massive international search. She was a major Hollywood star filming in Rome. Her absence would be noticed immediately and reported to authorities. The longer the Benedettos held her, the more dangerous their situation would become. Grace decided to use these facts to her advantage. On the morning of October 23rd, Grace told Marco that she was willing to consider his family's offer, but she needed to understand the business details before making any commitments. "I'm a professional," Grace said. "I don't sign contracts without understanding exactly what I'm agreeing to." This request put Marco in a difficult position. He couldn't explain the illegal aspects of the deal, but he also couldn't finalize the arrangement without Grace's cooperation. Marco made a crucial mistake. He decided to bring Grace more detailed information about the Benedetto family's operations, thinking this would convince her to participate. What Marco revealed instead gave Grace the information she needed to understand the full scope of the criminal conspiracy and plan her escape. Marco explained that the Benedetto family had been working for 2 years to establish a European film financing network that could process large amounts of money through legitimate-appearing entertainment investments. "We have partnerships with studios in Italy, France and England," Marco said proudly. "We can finance any project and distribute it worldwide." Grace asked careful questions about these partnerships, and gradually learned the names of specific companies, banks, and individuals involved in the money laundering network. She also learned that the Benedettos were in a violent conflict with the Torino family over control of this operation. "The Torinos think they can muscle us out," Marco said angrily. "But we've been planning this for years. We have better connections, better financing, better everything." Grace realized that her kidnapping was actually part of a larger war between criminal organizations, and that her safety depended on the outcome of this conflict. That afternoon, Grace heard gunshots outside the apartment building. Marco and his associates became agitated and began making urgent phone calls in rapid Italian that Grace couldn't understand. From the tone of the conversations, Grace gathered that the Torino family had discovered her location and was attempting their own kidnapping operation. The Benedettos were now fighting to keep Grace away from their rivals, while also trying to conclude their business with her before law enforcement agencies located the hideout. Grace was caught in the middle of a shooting war between Mafia families. As night fell on October 23rd, the situation became increasingly chaotic. Marco received word that police were conducting searches throughout Rome and were getting closer to discovering Grace's location. At the same time, Torino family soldiers were patrolling the neighborhood, looking for opportunities to grab Grace for themselves. Marco made a decision that probably saved Grace's life. He decided to move her to a more secure location outside Rome. Around midnight, Grace was bundled into another car and driven through dark countryside roads to a farmhouse about 40 miles south of the city. This location was more isolated but also more vulnerable. Grace understood that she was running out of time to escape before the situation became even more dangerous. The farmhouse was run by an elderly couple, Giovanni and Maria Rossi, who were clearly terrified of the Mafia men but too afraid to refuse their demands. Grace was given a small bedroom on the second floor of the farmhouse. The windows were barred, but Grace noticed that the bars were old and might be weakened by rust. More importantly, Grace observed that Giovanni Rossi seemed sympathetic to her situation and appeared to be uncomfortable with the Benedetto family's presence on his property. Grace decided to take a desperate risk. When Maria Rossi brought her dinner that evening, Grace quietly asked if there was a way to contact the outside world. "Please," Grace whispered in the broken Italian she had learned for Roman holiday, "I have children who are worried about me." This was a lie. Grace had no children at the time, but she hoped it would appeal to Maria's maternal instincts. Maria looked around nervously, then whispered back, "There is a telephone in the kitchen, but it is very dangerous." Grace understood that Maria wanted to help but was terrified of the consequences. "If something happened to the men outside," Grace suggested carefully, "could you call for help?" Maria nodded slightly, indicating that she would try if the opportunity arose. Grace spent the rest of October 24th waiting for a chance to create that opportunity. Her chance came around 3 a.m. on October 25th. The Benedetto men had been drinking and playing cards to stay alert during their guard duty. By the early morning hours they were drunk and careless. Grace had been working on the rusted window bars for hours, using a metal hairpin to scratch away the rust and weaken the connections. Around 3 a.m. she managed to loosen one of the bars enough to squeeze through the window. Grace climbed out onto the farmhouse roof and carefully made her way down to the ground using a drainage pipe. She had two choices: try to run through the countryside in darkness or attempt to get help from the Rossi family. Grace chose the riskier but potentially more effective option. She snuck back into the farmhouse through an unlocked door and found the kitchen telephone. Grace called the American embassy in Rome and reported her kidnapping, giving her location and details about her captors. Giovanni Rossi discovered Grace in the kitchen, but instead of alerting the Benedetto men, he helped her escape through the back door of the farmhouse. "Run to the main road," he whispered in Italian. "Hide until help comes." Grace spent the next hour hiding in a cornfield near the main road, watching for police cars. Just as dawn was breaking, she saw a convoy of Italian police vehicles racing toward the farmhouse. The rescue operation was swift and professional. The Benedetto kidnappers were arrested without violence, and Grace was safely recovered after exactly 48 hours in captivity. But Grace's ordeal was not over. During her debriefing with Italian police and FBI agents, Grace learned the full scope of the criminal conspiracy she had been caught in. The money laundering scheme involved not just the Benedetto and Torino families but also corrupt officials in the Italian government, American studio executives, and international banking networks. Grace's participation in the scheme would have legitimized a criminal enterprise that was funding drug trafficking, arms smuggling, and political corruption across Europe and America. More disturbing was the revelation that several major Hollywood stars had already been secretly participating in similar arrangements without realizing the criminal connections. FBI agents explained that Grace's kidnapping was part of a larger investigation into organized crime's infiltration of the entertainment industry. "Miss Kelly, we need you to keep this information confidential," the lead FBI agent told her. "We're building cases against very powerful people, and premature disclosure could compromise our investigations and put other people in danger." Grace agreed to cooperate with law enforcement, but she also insisted on knowing the full truth about Hollywood's connections to organized crime. What she learned horrified her. The FBI revealed that several major studios were receiving financing from Mafia-controlled banks, that some talent agencies were fronts for money laundering operations, and that certain film projects were designed primarily to process illegal funds rather than to create entertainment. Grace realized that her entire industry was more corrupt than she had ever imagined. The FBI asked Grace to participate in ongoing investigations by reporting any suspicious offers or unusual business proposals she might receive in the future. Grace agreed, understanding that she had a responsibility to help law enforcement combat organized crime's influence in Hollywood. But Grace also made a personal decision that would affect the rest of her career. She would be much more careful about the projects she chose and the people she worked with. Grace never spoke publicly about her 48-hour kidnapping ordeal. The FBI requested confidentiality to protect ongoing investigations, and Grace understood that revealing details could endanger other people. However, those close to Grace noticed significant changes in her behavior after the incident. Grace became much more selective about her film projects, turning down several lucrative offers without explanation. She hired additional security personnel for her travel and public appearances. Most notably, Grace accelerated her plans to leave Hollywood entirely. Her decision to marry Prince Rainier and retire from acting was influenced partly by her desire to escape an industry that she now understood was dangerously corrupt. The Benedetto and Torino families were eventually dismantled through a series of FBI raids and prosecutions that continued for several years after Grace's kidnapping. Marco Benedetto was sentenced to 25 years in prison for kidnapping, extortion, and money laundering. He died in prison in 1967. The money laundering investigation led to the exposure of corruption involving 12 major Hollywood figures, including 3 studio executives, 2 talent agents, and 7 actors who had unknowingly participated in illegal financing schemes. Giovanni and Maria Rossi, the farmhouse owners who helped Grace escape, were relocated and given new identities through a witness protection program. The FBI credited Grace's intelligence and resourcefulness with providing crucial information that helped break up one of the largest organized crime operations in entertainment history. But Grace paid a personal price for her involvement in this investigation. She lived the rest of her life knowing that her glamorous industry was built partly on criminal money and that some of her colleagues were either criminals themselves or unwitting participants in illegal schemes. Grace's experience with the Mafia kidnapping contributed to her decision to leave Hollywood permanently and seek a life that she could control and trust. Her 48 hours in captivity taught Grace Kelly that fame and success could make her a target for people who would use any means necessary to exploit her value. But those same 48 hours also proved that Grace Kelly was much stronger, smarter, and more resourceful than even she had realized. Grace Kelly survived her encounter with the Mafia, not through luck or rescue but through intelligence, courage, and determination. Her kidnapping remains one of the most dangerous celebrity crimes of the 1950s and one of the most successful escapes in the history of organized crime. Grace Kelly never let fear control her choices, but she never forgot the lesson that power and corruption could reach into any world, even the seemingly glamorous world of Hollywood. The woman who would become Princess of Monaco had proven that she was already royalty in the qualities that mattered most: courage under pressure and the intelligence to survive when survival seemed impossible. If this story amazed you, share it with others who love true crime and Hollywood mysteries. Hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments, would you have been able to escape like Grace Kelly did? Don't miss our next video where we reveal other dangerous encounters that Hollywood stars faced with organized crime, stories of survival, courage, and the dark side of fame. Remember, true strength isn't about avoiding danger, but about finding ways to overcome it when it finds you. Grace Kelly's 48 hours with the Mafia proved that intelligence and determination can defeat even the most dangerous enemies.